Hello, everybody, and welcome to Festival of Place, the Pineapples. It's our second day. Thank you for the emoji applause. If you want to find the emojis, they're just below me somewhere here. This is the event where we bring together developers, designers, and placemakers from across the built environment to share their work as they vie to win a golden pineapple for place. We want to celebrate the best in practice to shine a light on those who are delivering the changes we want to see in urban redevelopment. So we're so pleased to be working with the Design Council, who share our passion for design and its importance in creating safer and healthier places in the context of climate emergency. This morning, we'll be hearing from the shortlist for the Pineapple for Place of the Year, which seeks to recognize a neighborhood, large or small, that thrives, contributes to urban life, and makes a positive social impact. It's my pleasure to introduce the chair for this session, Emma Maier, an award-winning editor and leader in public policy. She's the previous editor-in-chief of Inside Housing and Social Housing and Local Government Chronicle and Materials Recycling Week. So welcome, Emma, and over to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Christine. It's great to be here. Welcome once again to the Festival of Place, the Pineapples. We have 4 projects shortlisted for Place of the Year, 4 places, I should say, shortlisted for Place of the Year. And this morning, we're going to have an opportunity to hear from each of them. Each team is going to have just 10 minutes to present, and then our judges will have 10 minutes to ask questions. To keep it fair, I'm going to be keeping a close eye on the time, just to make sure we keep on track. And I'll give a quick 1-minute warning. So apologies in advance, presenters, for interrupting your flow ever so slightly as I chip in with the 1-minute warning. We're going to be watched closely, of course, by our expert judging panel. You'll hear from them after the first presentation, but I'm just going to introduce them very quickly to you now so you know who we have with us. We've got Christopher Arthey, who's Planning and Development Manager at Axiom Developments Limited. Christopher's a planning and development surveyor, but also has a postgraduate degree in international real estate, as well as marketing, sales and project management experience. So a man of many talents. We're very pleased to have you here this morning with us, Christopher. We have Hazel Rounding, who's Managing Director of shedkm. Hazel specialises in leading multidisciplinary teams, creating master planning solutions and working closely with the commercial and client teams from concept right through to conception. So welcome, Hazel. Thank you for joining us. And we have Dominic Spray, who is Design Director and Architect at Hadley Property Group. Dominic is an experienced chartered architect who has delivered a wide range of construction projects through all design stages, both in the UK and internationally. And he has a particular interest in international trends and sustainable and commercial design-led solutions. So I think you'll agree that our judges are our formidable team. We're very pleased to have them with us, and we look forward to benefiting from their experience and their expertise. I have no doubt that they're going to be putting our contenders through their paces. Now, our visitors, our judges have visited the places that we're going to hear from this morning. So when they're fielding their questions, they're going to be referring to perhaps their experiences from their visits and, of course, from the information that our presenters share with us this morning. Now, before we get started, just a couple of house rules. Christine mentioned that you can use the little button down here to find some emojis to share, to encourage our speakers, which is lovely. We have the chat section just to the side of the screen in the black box. There's chat and there's Q&A there. So if there are any questions that you have during presentations, anything that you or any comments that you'd like to make, just use that box there. And the other thing that you might want to do is when presenters are sharing their slides, in the top right-hand corner, there will appear 4 little arrows. So if you want to increase the screen size so you can see the presentation a little bit larger, then just click on those arrows and that will increase the size. But now, without further ado, it's time for our first contender, which is West Green Place, Haringey. West Green Place is the regeneration of what was council-owned brownfield land into a new residential street with community uses. So to tell us more, I'm pleased to welcome our presenters, Simon Toplis from HDA and Simon Bayliss from HDA. Simon and Simon, over to you.
Good morning. Good morning. I will share my screen and hopefully it will go smoothly as before. Can you give me a second? And just to check everybody can see the image on the screen about to come up any second now.
Lovely. We have you. We have you there.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Well, I'm really pleased to be here and to be presenting this scheme, and pleased that we will be starting with a small jewel of a place, which I think is incredibly important to celebrate these small successes in, I think, repairing and inserting real successful places into our existing cities. We're going to see some bigger places later on, but we're really pleased to be celebrating this today. West Green Place is in Haringey. It's a development which we've been working on for a number of years on an existing backland site, which you can see on the aerial photo to the right hand here. The context is incredibly rich. To the eastern side, to the right of the screen, you can see the existing terrace of houses with relatively short back gardens. And then to the left of the screen, to the western side, is the beautiful Downhills Park. Now, historically, there was no connection through our site from the surrounding neighbourhood into the park, which has created something of a barrier. And within our site itself, there was an existing school building, an old community centre, which were there to be re-provided along with a nursery. Quite a lot of hard standing with some existing trees, particularly on the boundary to the east and the west side. The bottom left, you can see the screen there. The site sits a little bit distant from some of the main public transport hubs, but well connected through cycle infrastructure and quite accessible to both Seven Sisters and Turnpike Lane, giving access to obviously the wider London transport network. Working with our client Pocket Homes, who really fulfil a particular need within the development world, delivering affordable homes for local people, very specifically for key workers as well. So we were really keen. This is our third project with them and their largest to date, and it's really built through 5 years of consultation with the local authority, who are the vendors of the site. You can see here the way the master plan developed. It's obviously a long linear site, and we did look at a number of options, approaches to configuring the buildings within the site, as I say, through a great deal of consultation with the local authority and their design review panel. But the final scheme settled on a new entrance square to the northern section through that single point of arrival, and then a linear street that connected the top to the bottom, and a southern square, which gave a secondary access into Downhills Park. So 2 new accesses created for not just for the residents of the scheme, but for local residents further afield. Community centre in itself was particularly interesting as we developed the master plan with that replacement community centre. We then held a competition which David Carlin won, and we'll have a look at a few pictures of the community centre later on. The scheme emerged with 126 new homes, mostly configured in the 3 larger blocks facing the park, with a 4th block to the north enclosing the entrance square, and 16 2.5-storey terraced houses, the first houses that Pocket had built, and they were delivered as private homes to help cross-subsidise the scheme. The houses themselves are to full space standards. They're not Pocket in any way, but the rest of the scheme delivered not only the 1-bed Pocket units, but some innovative 2-bed types, which we'll look at again later. And as a result of the value created from those houses, we were able to deliver just under 80% of affordable homes. A final point for me is just to touch on the landscape, which is a particularly important part of that central street, which is a combination of some parking, servicing and access, but also a community allotments, an orchard, and some temporary planters, which we agreed with the council would be located on parking spaces. And if there was a need for additional parking, which was a consideration and a concern of the local residents, we would be able to remove those temporary planters to create more parking spaces. And thus far, I'm delighted to say that hasn't been necessary. You can see on the left there that connection with Downhills Park through the mature trees, but also rooftop terraces and private gardens for the houses really created a fantastic green infrastructure.
Thank you, Si. So the architecture we derived was taken really very much from looking at the local context. You can see in the bottom left there, Keston Road, which lies just to the east of the site, a very traditional Victorian street with a mixture of red brick and London stock brick with white stone detailing. And we took that and we reinterpreted it for the site. So rather than dividing the homes up individually into small panels of red and London stock brick, we subdivided the terraces so they alternate between those 2 colours with a beautiful zinc roof to the building. And then these fantastic GRC details around the openings and emphasising the entrances to the homes you can see in the top right there. Each of the park pavilions is then subdivided into a series of bays to break them down into a more human scale. The family houses, as Simon said, were the first that Pocket had delivered, and we were really excited to take the Pocket's concept and see how we could work with that really intelligent use of space to make the most of these homes. So working our way through the plan, what we did was we tried to minimise the impact on the adjacent homes by using roof lights to all of the rear rooms, and that allowed us to create this vaulted living space that extends right through the plan from front to back and provides a beautiful naturally lit space you can see in the top right of your screen there. And opposite those houses are the Pocket flats, and as you probably saw on the first slide there, they're arranged in a series of park villas, 3 of them, the first 2 at 4 stories and subdivided by a central stair core which provides a very clear articulation of the arrival and entrance into the building. You can see that on the bottom left, and on the right you can see the taller block as the site slopes down, where you're able to incorporate a 5-storey building, and that has balconies to the south which look onto the community orchard. And this aerial view shows those homes all configured and arranged. The homes were built using bathroom pods and an energy centre to reduce their environmental impact, and as was noted earlier, we incorporated these planted boxes in front of each of the flat blocks to allow flexibility for future parking should it be required, but they've been very much accommodated as a place for the community to use as allotments in their current configuration. And then at the northern end of the site, we introduced the Pocket flats in an entrance square building, which sort of mediates between the scale of the townhouses which lie to the south and then the larger pavilion blocks. And within that, we created Pocket 2-bed, 2-person sharer flats, where you get an ideal configuration for 2 people who wanted to share a home with this lovely balcony that looks onto the entrance square. In terms of the impact of the development, you can see on the bottom left of the screen there, the Goan Community Centre that was on the site. It was made up of some porter cabins and was not a fantastic facility. The new facility you can see on the bottom right, with this lovely high space you can see at the top there, with the leader of the Goan Community Centre in the centre of the screen. And then West Green Playgroup is on the bottom floor, and it has a fantastic play space at the back, which has been converted. And you can see in the top left what they had previously, some very rundown space, which is very shady next to the site boundary.
Fully delivered in CLT. And I think when we're talking about place, what's interesting is how much that relates to the people side as well as the physical side. The physical side obviously helps to create spaces and places that people want to spend time. You can see on the quote here, whenever I tell people about my home, the question they ask is how. And I think that's the feeling of lots of people who've moved to this area, is how fortunate they feel to be able to access and purchase a home in the borough that they work or live and have often grown up. So people are incredibly excited to move into these homes, and really it does provide a fantastic access to housing that otherwise isn't available on the market. And it's one of the reasons why we've worked quite consistently with Pocket since they came about. It really does generate that sense of pride and of community.
On the right here, Kezia
1 minute warning.
Is a good example. A local clinical psychologist who works in Tottenham and was able to buy her own home, and here she's pictured on the roof terrace of one of those flat blocks.
And I think just to touch on Pocket's sort of impact on that is that the way they work with the community, and by establishing things like planting days and sharing information with the residents, and also encouraging the residents to feedback and interact with them, is kind of a really essential part of creating place in order to move that physical beyond into a sort of people-centred, long-term, popular, sustainable community. So I hope that final image just gives you a sense of how the landscape and the quality of the architecture in quite a sort of gentle density, perhaps in modern terms, and in a way that we think is also quite beautiful, has helped to create a really great place. And that's us.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon and Simon. Thank you for that. So it's time to bring our judges in. We should have time for 2 or 3 questions. I'd urge you to keep your answers fairly succinct, because that allows us to get more questions in, so the judges can have more of their questions answered, and we can cover a little bit more ground. So judges, please can I invite you to join us, switch your cameras on, and we'll kick off with some questions. I think I will come to you first, Christopher. I think you've visited the site. Any initial comments and perhaps a question for our presenter?
Yeah, hi Simon and Simon. Yeah, I visited and I was really kind of blown away, kind of turning the corner on my bike by it. It just felt kind of immediately kind of embedded into its setting, and I just love the space and all the planting. And I mean, in terms of your presentation, the first thing that kind of just perked my interest, I'd like to learn a little more about, was the combined energy centre. So I just wondered how this came about, and does that link into any reduced energy costs to the residents? Just a little bit of more information would be helpful.
So the combined energy centre serves all of the pocket flats that front the park. So obviously the homes on the opposite side, the townhouses, aren't part of that network, but it does result in reduced energy costs for the pocket residents. It emerged through conversations with the local authority in terms of our what would the appropriate sort of way to reduce our carbon impact was. So that was kind of the solution we came up with, and it's located at the rear of the building, so it doesn't create a kind of blank facade to the building. So it's quite discreet in terms of how we could accommodate it, and then also the chimney could be located by the stair core in that design. So we worked really closely with the engineers to make sure that the design could both reduce those energy costs, reduce the carbon footprint, but also be integrated into the building successfully. So you wouldn't really know it was there. Potentially that's where your questions come from.
I think it also reflects the sort of pocket philosophy, because lots of the people buying are surprised to be able to buy a home here, but they're actually still quite expensive to buy anywhere. So actually the long-term approach to trying to reduce costs for residents, maintenance and running costs of the buildings are kept to a minimum, and that obviously goes to the energy strategy as well. So it's all part of the same philosophy.
Cool. The other question I had, I love the community centre and the design, and I just wondered how involved and how the different community groups were involved in the design brief process. Any insight on that would be helpful.
So it was a really interesting process. So they were part of the group that selected the preferred design, and then there was a series of workshops. We weren't involved as we weren't the architects for that building, but there was a series of workshops with the local community. And I know, in particular, the lady you saw, who's the leader of the growing community, was very vocal in her view of what she wanted from it, but was also just incredibly excited and pleased to get a new building. They'd managed to keep it going in the old one, but it was as much about the quality of the new building was obviously a key part of it, but also the kind of much greater visibility it had, because previously it was tucked away. You had to kind of drive right down to the end of the site and you wouldn't really know about it, whereas now it's a much more visible representation to the community, and it's visible from the park, but also as you come into the site. So I think the combination of obviously the quality of new build, but also that greater visibility was really appreciated.
But having been involved in the selection process, we really allowed the architects to sort of take it and do their thing. We didn't try and impose too many sort of master plan constraints or restrictions. So that was sort of the really important to the approach. But also the bringing together a community space and a nursery in a single building that just had that kind of shared approach was just, I think, a big step forward.
we didn't really say, but one of the critical things in the master plan was that that building could be built so those communities could carry on, community uses could carry on continuously, so that the nursery could move into that from their previous location, and they could carry on, so there's no loss of that service to the local people.
Great. Well, thank you. I think I'll hand over to some of the other judges to ask questions. Thank you.
I think we'll bring Dominic in now. Thank you, Christopher, for your questions. Dominic, over to you to follow up.
Hi there. Yeah, really enjoyed visiting the site. Thought it was a really great addition to London's sort of residential offer, and I was really interested in the kind of perhaps the changing views of the neighbours through the design and planning process, how they initially reacted and how they've ended up feeling about the place. I don't know if you.
Well, you'd be unsurprised. Yeah, you'd be unsurprised to hear that the first reaction was pretty negative and pretty resistant, despite the fact that the site was generally not accessed by most of the neighbourhood. But most wouldn't have even known it was there. But people's concerns are real, and we address them through consultation and engagement. Even at some point we had to do a small land swap where we required a small strip of sort of basically railinged off land. We gave back several times larger to the park, slightly increased the park size, and gradually I think through that process brought people on board, and eventually I think it's a really welcome addition. People can actually go and access the site, they can get to the park more easily, and some have even obviously moved into the homes themselves.
I was interested to understand the sort of security issues around the park boundary as well, and in relation to the neighbours, because obviously it appeared that you had to fob in and out of the park. Is that and whether the neighbours had access, the existing neighbours had fob access, or how was that managed, or is it just the residents?
Yeah, so it's controlled, so you can go through from the West Green Place side, so you can use it to get to the park, but it is controlled coming back in for security reasons.
Oh, I see. So it's a security it's one way.
Yeah. So that controls it. There were sort of various kind of ongoing anxieties around that security aspect from the community, and that was one of the things that we had to introduce to do that. The other one that's really interesting is you'd have noticed if you went recently was the park frontage. There was a lot of local concern about the overbearing nature of the buildings, which actually when it was originally built you could barely see them because the planting was so overgrown there, but they've just done some clearing of the undergrowth on the park edge there, so it's now opened up a lot more, and I think it actually makes the park on that side feel more secure as well. So it's actually been a double whammy of security. It's sort of improved the security for the residents because they've got security on that back line for their homes, but also made the park feel safer.
And the people in the terrace housing are comfortable now with the housing behind them? Are they? Because obviously it has a double effect. I mean, obviously you've got people moving in next to you, but at the same time it sort of raises the whole atmosphere in the area, doesn't it? So there's sort of
exactly
positives and negatives, I guess, in terms of their personal feeling.
Exactly. And we put so much effort into reducing the ridgeline of the housing that they're back onto and minimising the impact. There's no overlooking because it's roof lights on the rear side. It actually follows on from an earlier scheme we developed for Velux. So it really does minimise the impact and does hopefully give them more benefits than drawbacks.
I think the other thing, they were extremely anxious, as is commonly the case, about the level of parking and the overflow onto their street. And I go back to site fairly often, and the parking has never been full in all the time. Any time I've been back. So I think the impact has been less. So I think that will be a relief to them. They were perceiving that everyone who bought a pocket flat would turn up with a car, which commonly they've spent all of their money buying the pocket flat. So it'd be quite challenging to buy a car as well, I think.
Most first-time buyers don't seem to own a car these days, and good on them. So
Pocket had very little data about that.
The quality of the build's excellent. I mean, it's really lovely. The sort of, the general feeling and the community aspects really well worked in, and very humane. Very on a very human scale. So it's really nice the way it fits into the area. one more question was just about the sort of changing face of retail and food deliveries, whether that, I don't know, you know, has that changed? It's changed dramatically over the last couple of years, obviously. Whether the scheme did it take that into account initially, or is it something that?
No, I think we
super quick answer on that one, I'm afraid, because we're just drawing to a close. But do answer, but super quick.
We didn't really have the opportunity, it wasn't at the forefront of our mind. But it's a very robust street, as you'll have seen. So there's lots of scope for delivery, lots of space in front of each home, and a very clear public point of entry and public access to the main delivery points.
And the more people that deliver things on bikes, obviously, the better the scheme like this will respond. So no problems to be aware of.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I need to draw this slot to a close, but what a fascinating start to the morning. Thank you very much to Simon Toplis and Simon Bayliss. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now on to our second presentation of the day, which is Ram Quarter Wandsworth. This is a former Young's Brewery site which has been transformed into a new residential quarter, which celebrates the strong heritage of those brewery buildings while also creating a vibrant new heart in Wandsworth. So I'm really pleased to welcome our presenter, who is Pascal Wenzik from Epr Architects. So Pascal, welcome. Lovely to have you here. You're going to have 10 minutes to persuade our judges. So I hand over to you. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Morning, everyone, and morning, judges. I'll just quick say thanks to HJ for their presentation. I actually visited their scheme during lockdown and was very impressed as well. So quite enjoyed hearing a little bit more about that. I'll share my screen. Hopefully that's come up.
It has.
Excellent. So yes, a larger scheme than the previous one that was just presented. I'll just take you to, I think, as a starting point, I'm just going through the slides. So as a starting point, the heritage of the site. So it's mentioned as Young's Brewery. Young's had been on the site since 1831 and left in 2006. So they were there for almost 175 years. And during that time, the site just evolved in a kind of a needs basis. So buildings dating back from sort of the 17th century were then sort of added on with 18th century, 19th century and 20th century buildings. But there were listed buildings on the site, grade 2 star listed buildings and grade 2 buildings. The site also includes, so the Young's Brewery is on the eastern bank of the River Wandel, but the site also includes land on the western bank, which was the old Capitol Studios and some more listed townhouses. Within the site, so the listed buildings also contain kind of a vast array of old brewing paraphernalia. So you've got the kind of the tarnished coppers, there are beam engines which are in situ in the same location that they've been in since they were installed, which makes them the oldest beam engines in the world still in their current location. These items have been maintained and kept within the scheme, and they've kind of been celebrated. So we use some of the kind of brewing artifacts as almost like a living museum within the development. But then there are other aspects. So there's the Surrey Iron Railway went through the site. We've maintained some of the old railway sleepers and used those in the public realm. We've used slates from the brewing vats in the public realm. So really trying to kind of maintain the buildings of quality, celebrate those, reveal them to the public, and then use items from brewing kind of history to embed within the public realm and kind of give this sense of history and sense of place for the scheme. Just go to the next slide. So I mentioned that, so on the image on the right is that the red line is the site boundary. We have the River Wandel running through the centre of the site, and then just the southern boundary is Wandsworth High Street. So Wandsworth, for kind of a relatively affluent and desirable borough, had no real town centre. The site was almost entirely impenetrable from a ring road which goes round the site. It was an industrial site. There was no real public frontage to it. So there's a real opportunity that we had, which was to open up the site. So taking down all the boundaries, and the image on the right, this image down here, shows we took down all the boundaries. We've got, the site is bookended by the brewery complex, which is Grade 2 star listed, which is a real series of buildings which range from several centuries. And at the northern end is the stables, which up until Young's left, still had horses, geese, a ram, a real kind of menagerie of animals, but the ceremonial kind of delivery of beer around Wandsworth and even around parts of London with the old drays. So ability to kind of open up the whole of the site, creating 7 new access points around the site, revealing the River Wandel for the first time in sort of centuries back to the public. Unfortunately, Southside Shopping Centre to the south of Wandsworth High Street had actually culverted the Wandel. So the image at the top just shows Southside Shopping Centre, no image of the River Wandel, the River Wandel appearing through the centre of the site, crossing onto the other side, and then it continues down to the Thames. But for any residents or even public passing through Wandsworth, there was no real visual connection with the river at all. We've included 3 new pedestrian footbridges. So the site, as we saw, it was not only a new kind of cultural destination shopping for Wandsworth, but also an ability for the local and wider community to kind of use it as a faster way through the town centre, either along the Old York Road back to the train station. So the site becomes kind of a transitional site, allowing kind of the new residents to link in with the wider community around the site. So just about one of the entrances, this is the new entrance to the site from crossing Wandsworth High Street facing Southside Shopping Centre. We had a great advantage at the outset where we had our client was partial owner of Southside Shopping Centre. So whilst we developed an approach to have retail ground floor activity, but very much geared towards small scale, local boutique retail, as opposed to the kind of the large format retail in Southside Shopping Centre. This did spark a certain amount of regeneration of Southside Shopping Centre, and a lot of the peripheral shops started to become more outward facing. So we started to create more of a dialogue with the existing shopping in Wandsworth, which is very much internalised and didn't create any activity on the outside, to our new retail below the residential, which is very much about activating ground floor plane. And our approach to the master plan was very much about having a series of interlinked public spaces, which we'll go into a bit more detail. But the buildings at the southern portion are very much controlled by the scale of the existing Grade 2 heritage buildings, and then the listed chimney, which becomes a dominant feature and is all the buildings are subservient to the scale of the chimney, and becomes kind of a visual link from multiple views and multiple approaches into the new master plan. So a blend of old and new. We've got the view, this top left-hand view is actually the new brewery square. This square was kind of created by removing some quite offensive 1970s industrial units, which basically just there for the purpose of brewing beer. So as we carefully remove those, we're revealing the elevations, and the scheme was, we worked very hard with the Conservation Area Officer as well as Historic England to try and get these buildings to kind of become to have the presence that they really deserve, but also try and get activity back into them so they could actually be enjoyed by more people than the few people that worked on the site and actually appreciated some of the kind of the industrial architecture which had been developed over the history of the site. So whilst removing the 1970s buildings, we're kind of revealing elevations which hadn't been seen for centuries. Some of them in good condition, some of them revealing the scars of time, others which unfortunately couldn't be saved. So we had to introduce new elevations alongside existing elevations, creating what I think is a beautiful proportioned piece of public space, which is fronted by which tells the story of the brewery, has history running around it, as well as new elevations. The building on the bottom here, bottom left, is a new building. It actually creates the fourth elevation to this new piece of public space. There's a few elements that we started looking at very early on, which was, as opposed to what the retail agents wanted, which was a central space with all the shops, we very much wanted a series of spaces. So you can actually almost have a voyage of discovery as you go through the site, places that we all go and visit, and we kind of like, where you may find an access point, St Christopher's Place off Oxford Street, or something which is not an obvious route, but when you find it, you do enjoy it and feel like you've discovered something for yourself. So the series of spaces we try to do is actually start to constrain the relationship between buildings. So you have a moment of compression before releasing into larger open spaces, undercutting the building, which created a visual connection between the stables to the northern portion of the site, where there's listed buildings, back down to the southern portion of the site, where it's the brewery square. And the view at the top, you can see that actually this space gets used for multiple uses. So you've got a restaurant which spills out to that space. You've got a Sam Brooks brewery, which is now the new home of Sam Brooks, is within the site. And it also gets used by outdoor yoga during lockdown. The yoga studio, which is on the site, started using the site for outdoor yoga and other activities. So another major aspect was the River Wandel. River Wandel flows through the site. It was invisible to the public. We worked with Environmental Agency to raise the banks of the River Wandel, create flood defences. It's connected to the Thames, so we have both tidal and fluvial flooding, but really wanted to celebrate the river and kind of find this rekindling with nature, which was sort of absent within the site. And above the public realm, we've got these private courtyard gardens, which sit at first floor level. Again, you can see the chimney of the brewery. So there's a kind of a link back to the history, although you're sort of surrounded by new buildings. Scale of buildings, very much sympathetic to the scale of the historic buildings where we're in close proximity, but the scale increases at the centre of the site to create this new destination for Wandsworth, creating over 300 homes in the first phase, which has been delivered between 2018 and 2020. Inside the historic buildings, we've got a real kind of some real gems of spaces. So you can see the scale and volume of some of the living spaces. With limited amount of space, limited amount of apartments in the historic buildings, only 11 apartments, but they're each unique. And we've taken that kind of industrial character, industrial nature. We worked with Project Orange on the interior design, and sort of used that kind of industrial character both in the historic buildings and in the new buildings.
Pascal, thank you very much indeed.
Okay, I'll stop presenting?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Okay.
We've got to get our teeth into, but never fear, you will have an opportunity, I'm sure, to cover a little bit more ground during the questions, so you can sneak a bit more of what you were going to say.
Excellent, thank you very much.
So judges, time to come over to you. Could you switch your cameras on, please? I'm going to come first to Hazel, who I think is familiar with this scheme. Reactions perhaps from the presentation and from your knowledge of the scheme, and a question for Pascal.
Hi Pascal, thanks for that. Really interesting scheme, and a lot to get through in 10 minutes. Appreciate that. So I mean, I've been to the site, and congratulations on creating an identity, I would say, for Wandsworth, and dealing with that urban grain and the historical context of the site, I think, has been really important. One thing I just wanted to pick up on is that the master plan shows obviously areas east and west of the Wandel, and the whole idea is that the Wandel cuts through the site. And when you said first phase and 300 homes just towards the end of your presentation, that's clearly all of the area to the east of the Wandel. Yes. The master plan creates some contrast, doesn't it, with a pretty high tower on the west bank. So I suppose I wanted to ask, is that intentional? Because obviously this presentation is very much about that grain of Wandsworth that sits within the brewery context. But how do you envisage the next steps, I guess, in terms of the overall master plan and the impact of the tower on the site?
So the planning consent is in detail for it's an outline planning, a hybrid outline planning consent, but the tower is designed in detail. There was a slide very early on which actually shows us a series of tall buildings which are dotted along the Wandel, further outside Wandsworth, and then all the way down towards the Thames. So this kind of key tower on the outside bend of the River Wandel at that northern portion of the site was re-celebrating the rediscovery of the River Wandel, identifying the site as it's been kind of redeveloped or redefined from an industrial site into a cultural and residential site. The reason that it is in phases is that we had to deal with an awful lot of things, which included the gas holder just to the north of the site. I worked with this with the HSE significantly to actually achieve an ability to redevelop the site. We've got a Grampian condition which prevents development of the future phases until the gas holder, the hazardous chemical license has been revoked. The gas holder isn't being used, but the license is still there, so that is going to come forward. And it could, times have changed since we got planning consent. Maybe there would be adaptations to that planning consent. But the infrastructure, for instance, the energy centre, it's been in phase one. It's there for the total of 660 homes over both sites. Phase two actually has already been animated with a meanwhile use, which is the backyard cinema. So backyard cinema has got its first permanent home on phase two. Obviously, I think that's a great asset. It creates another form of sort of life and activity for Wandsworth, which it didn't have. So there's almost a kind of an element of discovering phase two currently, which is, I think, always a nice sort of approach. It doesn't suddenly appear and emerge from nowhere. There's a kind of an appreciation of it. And it could be that maybe the future phases could incorporate the backyard cinema. I think that sort of when a scheme stops for a period of time, there's a moment to reflect and maybe tweak, or I wouldn't say change considerably, because there's sort of the scale of buildings, but there's a holistic approach to the whole master plan and how both sides knit together and provide this connectivity to the wider community.
I just wanted to give you an opportunity to put that context to it, and obviously the meanwhile side of things as well, because it is an ongoing master plan for the area, I guess. But there was absolutely set the tone with the
I didn't really mention, but the site is actually England's oldest continuous brewery, and we maintained a microbrewery on the phase one site throughout construction, which means that the legacy, Sandbrook's brewery, has now gone into the brewery. It's London's oldest independent brewer and now has this continuous legacy. But we actually had brewing on site for the whole construction process since 2006, and limited people would go in and experience that. So there was it was a very, very small scale meanwhile use, but I think a very important meanwhile use during the earlier phases as well.
Okay,
thank you. I'd like to bring in Christopher now, please. Christopher, over to you to follow on. What would you like to know?
Hi, Pascal. Thanks for the presentation. I'm actually a Wandsworth resident, so I know it fairly well, and visited with my 15-month-old daughter who just started walking. So I think that was a fair test of the public realm. I think for me it was great to see the Wandel as something I wasn't really aware of coming right through the centre of Wandsworth. Were there any particular challenges in incorporating that into the master plan and bringing it forward? And have you got any metrics in terms of the biodiversity improvements or that have resulted from that?
So it was actually incredibly difficult. So the Wandel is at this point along the river is actually tidal. It's connected back to the River Thames. The half-tide weir further downstream has actually been dismantled. So the water level goes up and down, and the site is susceptible to both tidal and fluvial flooding. So fluvial flooding, which would happen under heavy rains. We had it last night. I'm pretty certain it didn't flood yesterday, but we had to deal with the Environmental Agency, who wanted us to build a metre-high flood defence running along the bank of the Wandel, which for us meant that you would end up with a solid wall and you wouldn't actually have that connection. So what we did was we raised the banks of the Wandel to either side, or to outside current, to the eastern side currently, by 1 metre. So although you're walking at an upper level, you've actually created the visual connection. We then supplemented, so we actually took the outside bends of the river and created sort of terrace planting. So that accentuates the meandering nature of the river through the site, but then deals with the capacity of tidal flooding if the levels come up. But it also gives you a level of different aquatic plants. The simplest metrics I can give you is when I first went there were shopping trolleys in the Wandel. There's now trees, biodiversity, there's sightings of kingfishers, there's herons, which basically are regulars along that stretch of the river. So, I mean, it's a real benefit that the future phases will also create a second walkway running down the other side of the Wandel, and 2 other bridges. So really excited, but the river walls, I think there was just on one side, there were 14 different constructions of river wall, which we had to dismantle and build new river walls. So there's a lot of complex elements that go into this, and the Environmental Agency have 2 hats. One, which they'd want you to make as much biodiversity as possible, and the other, they'd want you to make as much flood defence as possible. So again, have to kind of meander our way through that, but we feel it's been hugely successful.
Yeah, I loved it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Christopher. I'm just going to bring Dominic in, if I may, because I want him to have a chance to ask a question.
Yeah, quick question. I just wanted to understand about, I mean, obviously there's the way it's sort of set out, there's the retail and the gym, and whether there was any community use. I didn't.
So as part of the planning consent, we had 2 things which we did need to re-provide. One was a craft brewery, or a place for a brewer to go, and with that, a cultural centre or a heritage centre. The idea was that would be directly linked back to the history and the heritage of brewing. So the cultural centre, Sandbrooks have just taken over as their new permanent home. They're taking control of the heritage centre, and the heritage centre provides access to the coppers, which I showed images of, and also the beam engines, which can be viewed directly from the public space through the windows, which are sort of in their existing space, but will give you better access. And then there's a lot of kind of old Young's brewery paraphernalia that's been retained, and then also Sandbrooks' own brewery kind of history. So there's a cultural element, less so a sort of a community, but it is desired that would have this kind of cultural community outward facing component to the scheme.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. The clock is telling me that our time has come to an end, sadly. So thank you very much indeed to Pascal and our judges. We are now going to take a short comfort break. So grab a cuppa. I reckon those emails can wait though, because you don't want to miss the start of the next part of the session. In between sessions, feel free to join a table in the social lounge, and there you can sit down and meet other people who are here. And we're going to be back at 11 sharp, ready for hear from our next 2 projects. So I look forward to seeing you then.